I call to order the meeting of the Michigan Board of State Canvassers at 10 o'clock. Director Brader, has the meeting been properly noticed?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, the first order of business on our agenda is public comment. And Mr. Gallant has asked to speak. Are you connected, Mr. Gallant?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. And we
All
see
right.
you have also sent us some written comments, and so we appreciate that.
Yeah.
You have 1 minute to add to your written comments.
1 minute. Oh boy, wow, where'd you make that roll? Wait a minute. James Gale, Marquette County Suicide Prevention Coalition. Please do not certify the 2024 presidential primary election for Michigan because Marquette County only had 3 canvassers. In the minutes that I sent to you, there's only 3 canvassers. And Article 2, Section 7, Paragraph 2 says there shall be no majority of any political party on any canvassing board. They've been doing it in Marquette County for a long time. I have no idea why she keeps doing it. And they didn't post the meetings properly. They don't post the meetings. You didn't post your meeting properly because you didn't post it on the window out in front of the Austin building of the main office of the public body, which is out on Austin building out in the street. I've seen it. They don't do it in Marquette either. I'm trying to get them, just put it on the front of the building. That's in the Open Meetings Act manual of the Attorney General. So please don't certify this election and get these all across the whole state. How many of these people didn't have enough canvassers? Ingham County, they added 2. In 2022, they added 2 canvassers. They had 6, but the Constitution says you can only have 4. So please get with these rules of procedure, the Robert's Rules of Order. You never did address that, Madam Chair. You said you were gonna, and you didn't. So please help us, and please have a special meeting about that. Get a parliamentarian, do all that. You know, I mean, you understand where we're going with this, right, Madam Chair?
Thank you very much. The next item is consideration of the meeting minutes for the February 16th, 2024 meeting. Do we have?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of the February 16th, 2024 meeting.
Or
All in favor?
aye.
Aye. The motion carries. The next item is certification of the February 27th, 2024 presidential primary election. Director Brader?
Thank you, Chair Gerwitz. We had our first statewide election of the presidential election cycle, which was our presidential primary. This election was notable for a number of reasons, including the fact that it was the first statewide election where we had early in-person voting. So under the proposal 2022-2 and implementing legislation, every jurisdiction had to offer at least 9 days of early in-person voting, including 2 weekends. They had the option of offering that either as individual municipal jurisdictions or as teamed up with other municipal jurisdictions with shared sites, or they also had the opportunity of participating in a county-run site for any municipal jurisdictions that wanted to be part of that. If the county also agreed to do that. And so we saw a number of different combinations of that across the state. In total, there were about, I think, 500 or so early voting sites that were set up in various combinations. This was a major undertaking for both the Bureau of Elections and the Department of State, and also certainly for clerks and their staff. It required the purchase of a lot of new voting equipment. We designed a new early voting electronic poll book. And also just the assignment of staffing and voter education over that 9-day period was all new. So we definitely had the benefit of having piloted this with some jurisdictions in November of 2023, but overall it went very smoothly. The clerks, I think, did an outstanding job really offering all these new procedures for the first time, other than a few of the pilot jurisdictions. And it seemed pretty popular with voters. Voters, some of the ones I saw seemed to have a positive experience, and the clerks did as well. So in total, we had about 80,000 people vote during the early voting period. With that number statewide, obviously there weren't a lot of lines. I think we can expect that to increase quite a bit. That hopefully not the lines, but the number of people voting early will probably increase quite a bit later this year, and then in subsequent years. That seems to be the experience of other states. When you have new opportunities to vote, people will tend to take that up over time as it becomes more popular. So that was one thing that was different. Another thing that was new was this was also the first statewide election where we had the ability for jurisdictions to do early tabulation of absentee ballots. So they could actually start processing and tabulating the absentee ballots prior to election day. And we had a number of jurisdictions use that option. So all told, we had a total turnout of 1.9 million. We had about 1.1 million vote absentee, and as I said, about 80,000 early in person. So the majority of ballots were cast before election day. It'll certainly be interesting to track those numbers to see how it looks for August and then November. But at least so far, it seems like the opportunities to vote before election day are popular with voters. The canvases appear to be pretty smooth at the county level. We definitely need to, over the course of the year with our training and some of our follow-up, both with the clerks and with the canvassers, make sure everybody understands the nuances and the differences in terms of canvassing the early voting returns and materials. It works differently because you don't have the same precinct by precinct breakdown as you do with election day voting. So we had a lot of questions about that early on, but it seems like over the course of the canvases, they started to get the hang of it. So that'll definitely be a point of focus for us over the course of the year. But I think along with the local election officials and their staffs, I think the canvassers also did a good job of adjusting to the new procedures. The other thing that was distinctive about this election is that with our presidential primary, it's unique in the sense that this is the only election where you have to request the ballot you want in advance. So it's different from, say, the August even year primaries or other primaries where you have one ballot that has either party selection on either side. In this election, you have to request whether you want a Democratic ballot or a Republican ballot, or if you want a ballot that doesn't have a party affiliation on it, if your jurisdiction is offering local questions. That always results in a lot of questions for voters. The other thing that's a little bit difficult sometimes for voters and election officials is that because we have to set the ballot contents, that is the candidates, well ahead of the election, and because of the nature of presidential primaries, you have candidates dropping out. You also have people who may have voted for a candidate that had that candidate drop out, and then they want to potentially spoil that ballot and vote for somebody else. So all those things, those are really unique to the presidential primary. So we won't have that on our plate again for another 4 years, but including that in addition to all the new things for this year, I think the clerks really did an outstanding job. So with that said, as I mentioned, we had a total of about 1.9 million ballots cast. And in the Republican primary, Donald Trump was the winner. He had 761,163 votes. On the Democratic side, Joe Biden was the winner. He had 625,221 votes.
Go ahead.
I feel like you might be going to ask the same one I'm going to ask. You said 1.9 million ballots cast. Did I hear you correctly that 1.1 million were absentee?
Yes.
Okay. Well,
You did ask my question.
I could tell by your face, so thank you.
So can you kind of, I know you said a little bit on the early voting that the process and how they handle those is a little bit different. Can you kind of speak to some of the issues maybe that were had processing those early ballot, like the early voting or?
Sure. I mean, the major difference is that with early voting sites, you've got, instead of election day precincts where you have a tabulator and a ballot container and a poll book for each precinct, at the early voting sites, you're going to have multiple, if it's one municipality, you're going to have multiple precincts that are in the same electronic poll book for the early voting, or that are going to be in the same ballot container, because you can have one ballot or one tabulator that's being used for the entire city. And you can even use a tabulator and a container for multiple cities in some of the shared sites, and they can be programmed for that. That this is something that is common in other states to have multiple different ballot styles, multiple different precincts, multiple jurisdictions in the tabulator. But with that, the results that you get that come out of the electronic poll book as well as the ballots are organized differently. So it's just something that the canvassers aren't used to seeing, since they're used to having the precinct by precinct results. So that's just something that I think was new, and definitely something we'll need to reinforce with our training so that they know that that when they're looking at the early voting materials, they're going to come to them in a slightly different format.
Definitely, if there was, I'm not saying in the presidential election, but definitely the recount process would be a little bit different then, correct?
Yes.
I have the early voting sites that were established. Will those be the same through this entire cycle, or can those change throughout the process, whether between now and the August primary or August primary and the general?
They could change. Jurisdictions have until April 15th if they want to join or leave a county site or join or leave a multi-municipal site. They can do that until April 15th, again, with the agreement of both sides. I think after that, jurisdictions that are part of a joined site can still go off on their own until later on.
Till later.
Those are
Okay.
the potential changes we could see. I think that we're going to share whatever data we can to jurisdictions to help them just make their decisions on that. I think it's possible that some of the smaller jurisdictions that operated their own sites may choose to join with others to try to save resources. But that's really up to the jurisdictions until they have about a month to make those decisions.
For clarification, if I remember, I just want to make sure that I have this right. So for statewide elections, it is mandated now for those early voting sites. But if it is not a statewide if not statewide, if it's just like a county or local, they do not have, a municipality does not have to have an early voting site.
That is correct.
And then where the location required, or where are these early voting sites? Where where were they posted on the website of what the requirements were for location?
So there's a requirement that the jurisdictions post on their own sites where their early voting locations are. Additionally, we had the site, each jurisdiction share that information with us at the state level, so that voters, that we had them entered into the qualified voter file for their jurisdiction. And based on that, voters could go to Michigan.gov/vote, where they can look up their polling place and clerk locations, and they could also look up where their early voting site was.
Let me ask a question about the early tabulation of the AV ballots. How did that work? How quickly were the total results in for the AV ballots?
It definitely sped things up. To be clear, although they're allowed to tabulate the absentee ballots before election day, they're still not able to run any results until 8 p.m. on election night. So no results are released until then. It's also still the case that they do need to wait until usually after 8 p.m. before they can wrap everything up, because voters can continue to return absentee ballots until 8 p.m. And so they have to wait until 8 for the last person who was in line at a clerk's office, if they were looking for one in person, or check all the drop boxes, to make sure they have gotten all of the ballots as of 8 p.m. Then those ballots need to be checked in at the clerk's office to make sure that the signature matches, the envelope needs to be entered into qualified voter file to mark it as received, and only then can the absentee ballot envelope be processed for tabulation. So for those ones that come in right at the end, you're still looking at, potentially a couple hours or even a few hours in a bigger jurisdiction before the process can be complete. There are some ways to get some of the results out faster. Like, for example, Oakland County has a county-run absent voter counting board, and they handle all the ballots that come in before election day at the county site, but the municipalities handle the ones that are processed that come in on election day. So Oakland County site's able to report their results very quickly after 8 p.m. because they're not waiting for anything on election day. It's going to be the municipalities that are that are processing those. So that's why Oakland County is coming so fast. But for the most part, we still have to wait a couple or a few hours to have all the absentee ballot results reported, but it certainly speeds things up a lot relative to, say, 2020, when they couldn't even start tabulating ballots until election day. And so you had a huge number that were being processed just that had come in for the previous, 40 days, in addition to the ones coming on election day. The process now is a lot more efficient.
Thank you.
I have one more, if that's okay. Was there any issues or anyone for a regular AV voter that decided to vote early instead of using their AV option?
That process went really smoothly. We had the early voting electronic poll book was programmed so that unlike the election day electronic poll book, the early voting electronic poll book has a live connection to qualified voter file. So if a voter came in either with their absentee ballot or with some they basically had two options. One, if they had their absentee ballot, they could come in and they could actually just put it in the tabulator themselves. And so the early voting electronic poll book allows that ballot to basically be converted into an in-person ballot. Alternatively, if they don't have their absentee ballot, when they check in to vote early, it automatically cancels their absentee ballot. So that is able to happen in real time. It's very efficient. When it comes to election day, it's a little clunkier because it's offline. And so the election inspector has to call the clerk to verify what the absentee ballot status is. So we're going to look at some ways to improve the efficiency of that. But for the early voting process, it was very smooth.
So I cast my absentee ballot at an early voting site. It was so efficient. I was really impressed.
I voted in person, except our school was working. Our school did not close that day, so we actually got moved, but all the signs were in place. But I had two brand new election workers who took the stub off before I put it into the tabulator. And the woman looked at me and she said, well, if you make any mistakes, I don't know what's going to happen. And I said, the machine will tell me I made a mistake and will allow me to vote or not to vote. But with that, based on the examination of the returns received by the Secretary of State for the February 27th, 2024 presidential primary, I move that the Board of State Canvassers certify that the attached report is a true statement of the votes cast at the presidential primary for the office certified by this board.
Support.
It's been moved and supported. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries.
Madam Chair.
Presidential primary vote is certified.
May I interrupt for 1 second and just note for the record that the election was certified at 10:19 a.m. Thank you.
Next
Thank you.
item on our agenda is consideration of the certification of changes to the Hart voting system, Hart Verity Voting 2.7. Can you tell us about this, Director Brader?
Sure. So this is an update to Hart InterCivic's Verity voting system, which is used in 11 counties in Michigan, including Oakland County, and several other large counties. Currently, jurisdictions that use Hart are on Verity 2.6, which is the prior version upgrade that was approved by the board, I believe, in 2022. This is an updated version that's already been certified in Ohio, Oregon, Pennsylvania, and New York. It has a number of upgrades and new functionalities for the jurisdictions that use Hart that they can take advantage of. The main thing I want to highlight about this one that is helpful is that it has an updated, more modernized way of transmitting unofficial election results. So this includes a new feature called Verity Transmit, where the jurisdictions can take the results on the V drive on the stick that goes into the tabulator, take that to a different device outside of the polling place, and then insert the drive into that external device, and then they can send the unofficial results electronically over modem or you could also, I think, do it through an internet connection, hard connection over to the county to display the unofficial results. That has the benefit of the speed of the modeming of the unofficial results, but it allows you to do it without having to connect to a tabulator after the poll is closed to send the results. There's something sort of similar that Dominion already has, but that does require, again, taking the device out of the tabulator, the stick out of the tabulator to send the unofficial results. This will definitely help jurisdictions, HART jurisdictions, get results, unofficial results in more quickly and efficiently when they stop using the modems and the tabulators. HART is distinct from ES&S and Dominion in the sense that they do have an EAC certified version of sending unofficial results via modem. Dominion and ES&S jurisdictions have already stopped using those, and HART jurisdictions will in the near future. When the new versions or the new voting systems get approved under the EAC's new voluntary voting system guidelines 2.0, we expect the EAC will not be certifying versions that have a modem that connects to the tabulator. Again, that is after the polls close, after voting is done, but it's still something that we don't expect the EAC to certify in the future. So future versions of HART are not going to have the Verity Relay, which is the version that has the modem connect to the tabulator itself after the polls close. But the transmit is a helpful way of moving away from that and phasing out HART in the same way we have the other voting systems. Otherwise, there's just a lot of functionality, software improvements. There's some new components that work a little bit faster and that have some of the functionality that the jurisdictions have been asking for. So if this is certified, then jurisdictions will have the option of moving up to the newer version 2.7.
I got a couple questions. If that's okay.
We rely upon you to
So in the report they gave us, it talked about items for post-certification improvement. But you had a couple things that you have noted that should be addressed by the manufacturer, the touch reader, the partisan only with the device. And it's right. I'm kind of just going right to that part. Can you kind of give, is there a timeline, or is this just something that we want to address quickly, or is this something over time? Can you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, the specific timeline for addressing each of these things will probably depend on what the vendor can program, and I can't really speak to how long it might take them to address each of these things. But there were issues that we think could be improved, but didn't rise to the level of problematic enough that we didn't think the system should be certified. So typically, we would expect these could be addressed through a modification of the existing version. So it might be considered a de minimis change if the EAC and the voting system test laboratories determine that it didn't affect functionality, or it might be a version modification. So that would not be de minimis. Either way, it would require board approval. But we're going to be working with HART to try to get them to improve these, not wait till the next version of Verity, but actually do it in mid-course and make some programming updates.
Would those programming updates need to be approved by this board?
Yes, whether they're de minimis or not, the board would have to approve them.
In the report also, it was talking about that the state equipment needs to be updated. Can you expound on that?
Yeah, so we always get a copy of all the equipment that the jurisdictions use so that we can see issues that arise, or we can help with testing and programming. So they just need to send us a set of everything. We don't have it yet.
And I'm just kind of going through just some questions, so please bear with me. When you're going through on the actual ballot layout, this says original test ballots on number 4, provide PDF and paper ballots to be used in testing. The original test ballots from print vendor had issues and needed to be reprinted. That's on their end, correct? I'm just going.
Yeah.
And then there's a couple other things I highlighted in there. obviously you just talked about the updating the state equipment. That one. And then I just want to make sure, I always point this out when we do these, that it provides a method for rendering tabulation equipment inoperable if vote totals are revealed before the close of polls. And vote totals cannot be produced until polls are closed. Polls cannot be open or closed until time and date is set in the EMS, correct? Can you kind of explain why? I just want to make sure that people understand that one.
Yeah, so I mean, essentially that prevents a user from accidentally probably or intentionally, but regardless, it prevents them from like closing the polls and running a results tape until the polls have closed. So the equipment is programmed to know what time it is essentially. So if you try to run something before 8 p.m. on election night that actually would have results, it wouldn't let you do that.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'll move the first one because there's more. I'll move that the Board of State Canvassers certify that the Hart Verity voting 2.7 voting system for use in the state of Michigan.
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. The next item on the agenda is consideration of the proposed de minimis modifications to voting systems, Hart Verity 2.6 and Verity 2.7. Director Brader.
Thank you. So these are some of those de minimis modifications that I was talking about. These are not addressing, sorry, to be clear, these are not addressing some of the things we want them to look at for the future for 2.7, which may or may not be de minimis changes, but will be changes. So these are a number of minor modifications to 2.6 and now 2.7. The modifications will apply to both. So de minimis changes are changes that do not affect programming or functionality in a way that is material. I'll just read the literal wording. The de minimis change is one which will not materially alter the system's reliability, functionality, capability, or operation, and that the original hardware and the replacement hardware are electronically and mechanically interchangeable, have identical functionality and tolerances. So the voting system test laboratory SLI compliance did determine that these are de minimis changes. The EAC, Election Assistance Commission, has already approved them. So these are 4 changes that essentially affect hardware or other components that don't affect the functionality in a material way.
Any questions?
I have one because obviously these are all together. And that would be for, I believe, the second change to the Verity transmit receiving station. And it says reason for change to allow for stream backup for V drives. And it is a feature requested by the customers. Can you kind of explain that?
Yeah, let me just read through this first. Yeah,
tried to go
oh,
in
sorry.
order.
No, I'm just looking down to make sure I'm looking at the right one here. Are you talking about 1605? Is that the?
Yes.
Okay. This is basically syncing the backup data with, so they have, the V drives are the drives that that have the programming of the voting equipment. And so when, and this is with the new Verity Transmit, which is the system that allows you to take the V drive into an external device, out of the tabulator into an external device, and send the unofficial results to the county. So this basically they determined that a backup drive was not being automatically sent when, or stored when the data was sent. So this corrects that to make sure that the V drive is automatically creating that backup at the same time as the data is sent.
Thank you. And obviously, this is new to this system, I'm assuming, what you're talking about with the transmit.
Yes, that's new to 2.7.
So am I understanding correctly? That's essentially just making sure that when it gets sent, it's not lost when it's sent, so that there's a trace back to the data that came.
Yes, and also like if there was some problem in the transmission, you would verify that you had the same data on there. And you would always have the, you always have the actual ballots too, just to clarify. If there was some huge problem, you could always go back and use the ballots to retabulate.
And that would be for any voter assisted ballots, such as someone who uses any of the ones for,
The voter assist terminal.
yeah, the voter assist terminals.
Yeah, so those would be included in the results. So the voter assist terminal prints out a paper ballot, which the voter puts in the tabulator or gets assistance in putting in the tabulator. So that would be included in these results.
Any questions?
The last two.
Okay, do we have to make 4 separate motions with regard to item number 5? Do we have a motion on the additional equivalent sources and clerical corrections, ECO 01592?
I can do that one. I move that the Board of State Canvassers approve the additional equivalent sources and clerical corrections modifications for the Verity 2.6 system used in the state of Michigan.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The motion carries. Now, we need a motion regarding party selector contest missing anomaly corrections, ECO 01598.
I move that the Board of State Canvassers approve the party selector contest missing anomaly correction modification for the Verity 2.7 system.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. We need a motion regarding the Verity transmit streaming of backup V drives correction ECO 01605.
I was the one who asked about this one. I move that the Board of State Canvassers approve the Verity transmit screening of backup B drive correction modification of the Verity 2.7 system.
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
The motion carries. And finally, we need a motion regarding ballot targeting landmark detection improvement, ECO 01619.
I move that the Board of State Canvassers approve the ballot targeting landmark detection improvement modification for the Verity 2.7 systems.
Or,
All in favor?
Aye.
The motion carries. The next item on our agenda is consideration of the proposed de minimis modification to voting system Dominion 5.17. Dominion Suite 5.17. Director Brader?
So these are also de minimis changes, but these are for Dominion voting systems, as you noted, Chair Gurwitz. So this is for the Dominion system, which is used in 65 counties, including Wayne County and Kent County. So I won't read the standard for de minimis again, but this is de minimis. The only difference here is this one was tested by a different voting system test laboratory, ProVNV, that also determined that these are de minimis changes. So again, we're talking about replacement of hardware components and other components that are reaching end of life, including a Dell workstation, that is a computer, and memory card devices.
Questions?
I just have a question on these memory cards. These are not like physically battery backed up memory cards, are they?
Physically backed up.
So I remember years, I don't want to say year, I can say years ago, the memory cards actually had physical battery backups on them for the big brown box machines. Dave, no. Thank you. Thank you, David. I just want to make sure. because it's all off of the, all off the shelf, but, thank you. Just, I appreciate that.
For the record, there are no batteries on it, just in case anyone watching didn't hear that.
Just in case anyone didn't know, the old ones did, and I know exactly they were $357 to replace because I had to actually approve that. I don't have any other questions, but I will make a motion, and I move that the Board of State Canvassers approve the use of the Dell Latitude 3340 as an ICVA workstation, since the Dell Latitude 3420 and 3330 are becoming commercially unavailable for the Democracy Suite 5.17 voting system in the state of Michigan.
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
The motion carries.
I'll keep going then. Okay.
Mhm.
I move that the Board of State Canvassers approve the use of the Delkin Devices USB 3.0 CF and SD memory card reader, since the previous model is becoming commercially unavailable for the Democracy Suite 5.17 voting system in the state of Michigan.
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. The next item on our agenda is consideration of proposed rulemaking. Director Brader?
Thank you, Chair Gerwitz. So what we have for the board to consider here is whether the board wants to support going forward with the promulgation of administrative rules governing recounts. As the board's probably aware, there's also some legislation on this. But this would be something that the Board of State Canvassers is doing pursuant to its rulemaking authority to update some of the recount administrative rules, which have not been updated in some time. I'm going to hand it off to Adam to talk about this in more detail.
Thank you.
So I want to start first. I think a couple of things will be helpful. One, to just kind of go over a brief update about the administrative rulemaking process in general. And then we can also happy to discuss any substance if we would like as well. So I'm going to start first with just an overview of the process. The rule promulgation process under the Administrative Procedures Act is a involved process that involves the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs. And it also involves the legislature at a certain extent, as well as the public in a number of different steps. So the very first step in the process, which is where we're at now, is to request permission to even start the rulemaking process. We would have to submit a request for rulemaking with the Office of Administrative Hearings and Rules, which is under LARA, and basically submit a questionnaire that says, this is why we're requesting making. This is why we're requesting to engage in the rulemaking, in the rule promulgation process. Here's how, et cetera, and what our plans are, things like that. From there, we have to submit what's called a regulatory impact statement. The regulatory impact statement deals with a cost benefit analysis. It asks questions along the lines of, how will this impact the regulated community? How will it impact businesses? How will it impact agricultural community? Things like that, a number of which are not going to be applicable to our rulemaking promulgation, which we're doing here. But there's about 125 questions and subparts to those questions that have to be answered. At that stage, we also submit the rule itself to LARA, and basically they will look at it for what's the equivalent of approval as to form, how the board would look at petitions, for example. They'll make sure it complies with the format requirements, the font size, the number of spaces after periods, those kind of like form requirements, as I would equate to with that the board is used to doing. So once all of that gets approved, then we go into the public comment portion of it. We would formally open public comment. It has to be posted on our website for a number of days. There are posting requirements for newspapers, both for time and geographical representation. It has to be, one has to be in the Upper Peninsula, and then it has to be placed elsewhere as well. And it also has to be placed in the Michigan Register for a certain period of time. And then we go into public comment. It can be open for the period of time that we set. And we have to do a public hearing where individuals are allowed to attend and submit public comment on the rule to say changes or anything like that, whatever the public would like to submit. They can do it in writing, or it can be done in person at that public hearing as well. After that public hearing and after the rule promulgation process, I'm sorry, after the public comment process in general closes, we then would compile the public comment, make any changes to the proposed rules that may be necessary. And then we have to submit to the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules a report that basically compiles everything that says, these are the rules that we are intending to promulgate. Here's the public comment that was received. Here are the changes that we are making in response to public comment. And more will certify it to JCAR. JCAR is made up of equal proportion of the House and Senate, and they have a number of options once it goes to JCAR as well. They can request changes. They can say it can go into effect now, or they could introduce legislation on the exact rule that would be proposed as well. There's time filings associated with that, but then from there, it would be filed with the Office of the Great Seal in the Secretary of State's office in the Bureau of Elections, and then it would become, it would go into effect. So we are at the very beginning, step one right now, where we're wanting to request permission to start the rulemaking process with that request for rulemaking itself. In general, what the rules do, the last time the rules were amended was the year that they were implemented in 1979. They don't take, what we have done is essentially taken what the board's standards, if you'll recall from 2022, the board approved the procedures for the statewide recount. What we have done is essentially taken that packet of, I don't remember how big that packet was, but and we have put that into the rules just to make it clear and consistent as to exactly what we're doing. We've also proposed rescinding rules that are outdated. For example, the rules still contemplate punch cards and chads. We don't use those ballots anymore, so we don't need recount procedures for that. So we've proposed rescinding rules, for example, on that. We have shared this with some county clerks as well. We've gotten some feedback. And what the board has in its packet, you've got, I had previously sent you a Word version with track changes, but what we gave you today is essentially the same thing, but we gave you in a bold strike through version, if that's a little bit more helpful as well. That's more probably equivalent to legislation. If you remember looking at that, it's the style that we have to submit it into more. But there were a few changes, minor changes that I just wanted to point out from what you have versus what we sent earlier in the week. With Rule 8 and Rule 9A, in the version that I sent you earlier in the week, we had those separated. In the version in your packets today, we just combined them into one rule. In review, we realized that they were a little bit duplicative and unnecessary to have two separate. So we streamlined that just to combine it into one rule and have omitted 9A and just kept it as to Rule 8. And then for Rule 22, we expanded a little bit. This was one of the pieces of feedback that we received, just to expand it a little bit as to the specific procedures, what was done. Again, these procedures are all things that the board already does. These are the methods of recounting as the board already conducts recounts, just making sure that it is clear in the administrative rules specifically. And then finally, in Rule 23, we clarified one of the pictures. It just clearing, we had indicated it was a invalid vote, but it was actually a valid vote. So just clearing up that typo in Rule 23. So just three minor changes from what you have. I think that's pretty much at a high level. Happy to dig into it if you want to work through. Again, I just want to emphasize that these will be posted online. They will be shared for public comment. We will comply with the APA's requirements and there will be a set time for members of the public, including clerks, anybody else who also has not seen these yet, to be able to provide public comment for us to consider and make any changes to. Right now, it is just, like I said, that very first step of, we just want to start the process. The motion that you have is to start that process, but then to give the Bureau the authority on behalf of the Board of State Canvassers to do all of those questions. There's in total about 200 questions between the two different parts that have to be submitted before we can even get to the public comment piece. So that's where we're at right now. I will also note one last thing, and then I'll stop talking. This is under the election law. This is specifically reserved for the Board of State Canvassers to promulgate rules for state level recounts. So recounts that the Board of State Canvassers conducts. It is, I believe, the only provision under election law that the board has rulemaking authority over. So that's why this is a little bit different from other discussions that we've had before. So with that, now I will stop talking and if happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions?
Regarding the timeline, you've provided us a helpful kind of estimated timetable with days. On the draft rules portion, it lists 105 days. Should we expect that to take about that long, or because you've done the work in terms of getting that draft to us for us to look at, will that be truncated?
In my experience, it will be truncated. In general, when what I like to do is in that timeline, there's those three things that are in red. We have those ready to go now. What I think that this time frame, that what Lara contemplates, is that essentially you're doing it every step of the way, so that you do your RFR and you don't even start any of the other steps until you have that permission. So because we have already drafted the rules, it's been shared with you for any consideration, and we have answers to those questions. We're ready to go, and I would anticipate that it would be truncated and it would not take 105 days.
So we should expect the public comment and hearing phase sometime in the next several months.
I think it's fair to assume that, yes. I don't want to give a specific just because it does depend, but yes, within estimate 1 to 3 months is what I would say.
I have two questions for you. That's okay.
Of course.
Question one is, can you tell us again, which county clerks you ran this by?
I shared it with the Ingham County Clerk, the Oakland County Clerk, the Ottawa County Clerk, and the Kent County Clerk to get a variety of voting equipments that are used and just and those specific counties in general, because they tend volume wise, at least to my knowledge, to have the most recounts. They have districts that are wholly contained within their county as well. So that was why I shared it with them. It will also go out to all county clerks as well. So that was just kind of the initial.
Okay, thank you. Second question is a little bit of a one-off, just a clarification. The document that you presented in the package today, which has the rules that are being promulgated, that truly is only a placeholder document at this point. In other words, once this process starts, that document could be accepted in part, in whole, it'll be cut up, it'll be changed, but it could even be totally rejected. Is that correct in this process?
I don't think it would necessarily be totally rejected. That ultimately would be, so when we go through the process, the public could say, hey, Rule 2, for example, you've left out this piece. And the board we would present that back to the board, and the board would say yes or no, basically, like what change should we make? We'll give a recommendation and say, hey, based on this public comment, this is what we would recommend, and ultimately it would still be presented to the board. But I don't think the entire rule set would necessarily just be rejected outright unless the board decided we don't want to do this anymore.
The question is actually a little bit of there's a subtlety there. The subtlety is that what we're putting through today, when you bring it to the next level, we are not casting anything in stone here that's in that document. That's a yes or no.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay.
anything as we move forward, anything can change.
Okay.
If there's something that, like I said, if somebody reads it and says, oh, you didn't consider this, or, oh, wait, that's really not correct, or whatever, that can still change at any point. It just can only change in response to a public comment at this point that we receive.
Okay. Thank you.
And I'm understanding that any changes would be determined by a majority vote of this board. Is that correct?
I would think that's fair to say. I'm looking at Heather to double check. I will be honest, this is the first time I've done rulemaking with the board, but I think it's fair to say this is the board's rulemaking authority. So it would be presented to the board for final approval before it would move forward.
So I'm interested in your telling us that the rules that are currently in place were adopted in 1979. And they have been out of date for a long time, have they not?
Yes.
I mean, they're more out of date now because we've had
Yeah.
more election law changes, but have they essentially just been ignored?
No, they haven't been ignored. They've still been followed. But it's now becoming necessary to update them because of all of the changes to election law last year. With early vote centers, for example, being established by Michigan election law, and all of the other changes to proposal 22-2, there has been a lot that has changed with election administration in general in the last, really since 2018 to present. So the rules really need to be updated to properly reflect what's going to happen and to incorporate some of those more newer changes as well.
And so we've basically got 3 tiers of ways that these laws are enforced: the legislation, the rules, and then our procedures. And if there is a conflict, that's the priority, right? If the legislation, if they're in conflict, the legislation is going to win out over procedures, rules will win out of procedures, that type of thing. And essentially what we're doing here is setting the rules to match our procedures.
That's correct. And so even to the extent since 79, like I'll use the chat example, like the legislation has changed. So that wins, quote unquote. So the rule is no longer necessary because the legislation has specific requirements as to what the ballots need to look like, et cetera. And who decides that, et cetera, all of that piece of it. So the rules are designed essentially to match the current state of election administration and the procedures that the board adopted in 22. There are some things in addition to the procedures since 22 because we didn't have early voting in 22. We've also tried to clarify exactly how challenges get appealed to the board. If you'll recall, in 22, we had about 150 challenges that were appealed to the Board of State Canvassers. So we've tried to clarify specifically, this is how, and this is what comes to the board. And so we've expanded on that a little bit as well.
So what you're putting here is really, this process is more of a housekeeping item and less of a sea change.
I would agree with that, yes.
Okay, and yet in the same token, it's also designed to reflect some of the changes that are coming through with Prop 2, right?
I would also agree with that as well.
Other questions?
You and I may be the only two that were here 179.
I was 1.
I was 3. I don't want to get into the weeds on this one, but I'm just looking through here. Obviously, recounting of absentee ballots are in here, and I believe the early voting is addressed in here. Okay, this isn't digging too deep. No. It's actually something that's an actual rules we can actually promulgate.
No, I know we've been talking about promulgating rules for a long time. we ought to have rules for this and we ought to have rules for that. And I think that what Mr. Fracassi is telling us is that this is the only area in which we can promulgate. Am I correct?
Yes, I believe that is correct.
Okay, well, that's an important clarification because, you know, we've just kind of chatted about the necessity for rules. And as I understand it, in other areas, the rules would need to be promulgated by the Secretary of State rather than by the Board of Canvassers. So this is the one area in which we have exclusive authority. Interesting.
I find that, you know, having been through a statewide recount, although some people tell me that that didn't happen. But also on some other, that this would count for judicial or yes, because it's under our jurisdiction. But at least having the ability to set what the rules are for that process. So that when people come into the process, they understand exactly what is expected, what they will see, what it will go over. I've seen physically at recounts, just things go a little awry at times. And I'm not saying that is the recount itself. I'm just saying that if having us approve those rules, like our policy, it wasn't really a rule, it's just a procedure. But I would be interested in pursuing this. I'm just gonna let you guys know that. Because I just even reading through what we've been given, it lays out exactly, you know, this is exactly how this has to happen. And then there is no movement, there's no, someone knows where I'm going with this, but I can't get it out.
You mentioned running this by those 4 clerks. Was there any indication from any of them, no, like, don't do this, this is a bad idea, or this is way off base? Or was it pretty much, yeah, go get it?
In general, they were very happy that we were exploring this idea and supportive of what was in there.
Thank you.
So, as I understand it, this is not just a good idea, but a necessity.
I would probably agree with that as well.
Any further questions?
I'll make a motion. I move that the Board of State Canvassers support the draft administrative rules regarding recounts and begin the rule promulgation process. I further move that the board authorize the Bureau of Elections to act on its behalf in proceeding through the rule promulgation process.
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries.
And I guess I just have one request related to the acting on our behalf, and you guys are always very good about this, just keeping us up to date on each step and allowing us to bother you with our thoughts. So
Your thoughts are never a bother and they are always welcome. But yes, absolutely. It's really just so that way I can submit those questions and you guys don't have to submit them to Lara.
Curiosity, do you have, are those questions publicly available?
They are, yes,
Can
I
you
can
send
send
us a
them to you
link
if
and
you'd like.
tell us where to find them?
absolutely.
Do we have any legal report?
Happy to report that the Michigan Supreme Court entered an order in the Graziano case, which I think puts to rest the last of the fracking lawsuits.
I think I'm the only one here that was still here.
It's been a while.
And a question for you on the legal side. You had another one that was pending in front of the Supreme Court from a signature petition that we sent back.
Right. You're talking about the raise the wage
Yes.
petition. So that is still sitting at the Michigan Supreme Court. We had put in a motion to hold briefing in that case in abeyance until the case, the adopt and amend case, the Mothering Justice case is resolved, because the resolution of that case may impact what briefs say in the raise the wage. It also could potentially impact whether that appeal continues to proceed or not. So kind of in a holding pattern until Mothering Justice is decided.
So that's gonna be a while yet.
It should be decided before the end of July.
I know that it is not your litigation responsibility, but can you give us any update on the criminal proceedings with regard to the false signature debacle that we faced in 2022? Yes.
Unfortunately, Member Gerwitz, I am not involved in the criminal proceedings. I believe that we issued charges. There were charges against some of the entities that were operating those signature gatherers. And so beyond that, I don't know exactly what's going on in the criminal charges right now with those.
I remember seeing something in the newspapers. And I don't remember if it was with regard to preliminary exam or,
That sounds right.
so they would have been bound over presumably. We don't know. Okay.
I
We just have to read the papers like everybody else.
I'd be happy to find out what I can find out and email all of you and give you an update on that if you would like.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do we have any other business?
Just to mention, I guess Act My Tax, just so you know. So they had come in a couple times, as I'm sure you remember, with a constitutional amendment, initiated, constitutional amendment petition. They had sought 100-word summary and also approval as to form. At the most recent meeting, the board did approve a 100-word summary, but did not approve as to form. And they have decided to, I guess, forego that process. They did submit a copy under section 483A of the petition that they intend to circulate. So presumably they are circulating, although we don't necessarily know. And that's their choice. They don't have to get approval as to form. That's a courtesy the board provides. And they don't have to utilize the 100-word summary that I draft and you all approve. They can do their own. So if they come in with signatures, those would be issues that the board could take up at that time. And I'm sure we would hear various opinions about that.
You know, I had a question on that one, if I could ask that. I saw what you sent through the other day about that and I understand that we did not approve the form and I get how they've done that. The one that was a little perplexing to me was we had approved a 100-word summary. And yet they decided that they don't care about that either. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, that's up to them. I don't know why they wouldn't want to use that. It possibly made changes to language or possibly they just prefer to use their own summary. And they can put their own summary on there. The only consequence of that is if they use a summary that I draft and you approve, then the board cannot consider challenges to the petition based on the idea that the summary is misleading. Whereas now the board presumably could entertain those challenges.
The summary that was done for the 100-word for the Act My Tax, if I remember, that was one that was negotiated with both sides and the Board of Elections out in the hallway. And there was a fair amount of work put into that. So that's been put aside.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's the choice of the circulator. I don't know, what their what motivation for that is, but that they have that choice.
Okay, thank you.
Or Adam has another thing.
I have one last thing. I actually just received notice that House Elections is going to be meeting tomorrow at 10:30 in room 327 to take up the petition bills that the board passed last meeting, I believe it was. So they have broken it into several bills instead of just the one that the board put together, but that is going to be tomorrow at 10:30 in the House Office Building, which is right across the street from the Capitol.
Thank you. Anything further? And at 11:06, hearing closes.